What am I saying again?
This is MPW,
MPW.
the podcast
with your host,
Xylo Aria. Cool.
A podcast about music production
for the everyday musician,
where we learn from experienced studio engineers and each other.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of the MPW podcast. I'm your host, Xylo Aria, and today we are super lucky to be talking to the incredible Drum and Lace. So Drum and Lace is a composer, a sound artist and performer who specializes in creating music for visuals and has worked on a variety of projects, including scoring for an NBC show called The Good Girls, HBO documentaries, commercials, fashion films, and so much more. So great to have you here today.
Of course. Thank you. It's a pleasure to talk to you.
Yeah. Oh, lovely. And so you're in LA and it's 2 p.m. So how's your morning and day been so far?
You know, it's been good. It's been a little bit sleepy because it's actually been raining yesterday and today. So I feel like you get so used to the sunshine when you live in LA that when you don't have that, it's kind of hard. You know, it's like just being foggy brained all day. So I've already had 2 coffees and I thought about having another one and I was like, no. It should be fine. I'll get a second wind. But you know, it's been a Monday morning just catching up on a lot of emails and stuff like that. So yeah.
Oh, lovely. Well, I have no sympathy for your one day of rain.
Yeah, no, I'm sure. Yeah.
Yeah, cool. All right. So we'll be talking a bit more about kind of sound for visuals. But yeah, I'd love to hear about, how you got to where you are today.
So I'm from Florence in Italy. I don't know. I feel like I was always the music kid, growing up. I was always either singing or trying to learn guitar or, playing piano because that was important to my grandmother because she liked to play piano. So she got me lessons when I was in elementary school. And they didn't really stick. I mean, there's a lot of what I learned then was important for now. But, I never got to any sort of level of anything. But so, I graduated from this very small school and I went to an international school in high school. And I graduated, I'd gotten pretty good grades in, things like biology. And at the time kind of just applied to a bunch of colleges. And I knew that I wanted to try to go to the US. So I applied to a bunch of colleges and one of them was Berklee College of Music. And the only reason why I even knew that that was a thing was because I'd had the luck to visit Boston the summer before with my family, and we just walked by it because it's in a, kind of in a part of Boston that's kind of touristy. And I was like, oh, what's this place about? And I applied and I got in and I went, originally thinking that I was going to go to be a vocalist. And I got there and, you're so used to being the big fish in a small pond because being the music person growing up, that then I got to Berklee and you realize that it's just a ton of the same big fish in a small pond, but now you're the tiniest of fish in the biggest of ponds. And that I just wasn't really cut for, what it took to be a performance major at Berklee. So I was all the way, so far from home. And I was like, well, I love film. And there's this degree called film scoring. Because to be completely honest, I hadn't thought too much about film scores, hadn't really thought about music and films that much apart from songs. And it just seemed like something that, I was like, well, my parents are paying so much money, I better get my money's worth out of this education. So I kind of fell into film scoring and immediately kind of fell in love with it. That was my first introduction to it. And I graduated and then, you're kind of given the option or, you're kind of given this idea that LA is the place to go. But at the time, it just didn't really seem like the right fit. So I wound up applying for grad schools just because I also graduated in 2008. And there was no opportunities for visas for foreigners. And I was like, well, if I want to stay in the US, I'm going to have to try to go to, get a master's or do something else. So I did that and did something completely different and worked in, got a master's in music tech and 3D audio and acoustics. And it wasn't until I was done with that I was like, and working at a company for a year and a half, 2 years after that, doing in-house composition and sound design that I was like, my husband and I felt like we were ready to come out to LA and try to do the thing. And, now I've been here for 7 years and it's been a journey of, getting gigs and figuring stuff out and whatnot. But thankfully things seem to be panning out. So
Yeah, it's interesting that you kind of started off in performance and then moved into film. And I think that's really it's an amazing thing to know that something is actually not really for you and to move into something else. Because I think a lot of people, when they start something, they're like, oh, I'll just kind of see it through, but like I don't know if I'm really liking it. But to kind of identify that and find something else that feels a bit more you to do that, I think that's really great.
yeah, I grew up with, the big pop stars of the moment, the Britney Spears and all of that. And I think it was just really easy as a kind of impressionable teen to be like, oh, that's what I want to do. I want to be pop star, or I want to be, in my mind, I wanted to be the next Janis Joplin. Like I wanted to, in that kind of more like bluesy thing. And it's just, you realize that I think it takes a certain degree of exhibitionism to be that kind of performer. And I think it wasn't until Berkeley that I was confronted with people that had that charisma. And I was like, that's not me. And I love being behind the scenes. I love the kind of where I'm at right now. And it's like, it's great. It works really well for me. So you're totally right.
Yeah, right. Is LA surrounded by people like that? I mean, that's kind of the impression that you get from not being there.
Yeah, I mean, when we used to go, when people used to go out to eat, I feel like half of the waiters that you usually have are actors or people that are trying to get into the industry. But I hate to say like physical attribute type roles, but ultimately, like I think that's. But yeah, so LA is just kind of full of people that are in the film and music industry at this point. It's inevitable. I think, yeah.
Fascinating. And I've seen a few of your performances and things, and I've noticed that, you seem very at home with technology, and especially with things like modular synths and, so many things going on around you. And, as someone producing music, but, still finding things like modular synths, I find quite intimidating personally. How did you get introduced into that? Was that through your degree, or was it kind of earlier on in your life?
It was definitely, I feel like it was, compared to the kids now, pretty late, because I actually, when I got to college, and I've told this story numerous times, but the only class that I nearly failed my first year was music technology, just because I had this kind of like guttural, like, when you're so scared of failing at something that you just like don't even want to do it. Like that's kind of how I felt about technology in general. And it wasn't until I started dating my now husband, who was in a band that played a lot of synths, that I kind of got to play with synthesis. And that was the beginning of it. And then I clearly remember, I can't remember what version it is, but I remember really well like downloading and starting to play with Ableton.
Yeah.
And I think that really helped, because Pro Tools just didn't feel right for creation for me at the time, even though I'd learned how to use it in school. And I think Ableton and just starting to use synthesis within that. And then, you slowly branch off to analog. And then all of a sudden it's like, I started a few years ago using semi-analog, and then you start to kind of grasp the concept of that. And now I've jumped into Eurorack, but I'm still, compared to a lot of people out there, I've just scratched the surface. I feel like a lot of the times it's what sounds really cool are happy accidents. I really, really admire anyone who could come over and be like, so this is doing this to this circuit, like the people that are really dense about, like, I'm definitely not that. So I think it's just, I make it work for me. And I think that that's the biggest thing. Like technology should be helpful. So it's like, as long as you can find a way to make it work for you, like that's all you really need to know. Like, I don't need to worry about the fact that I don't know everything, because that's how I used to be. I used to be like, if I can't know everything about it, then I don't want to do it.
Yeah, right. That's actually so comforting to know, because I think when when I first looked at modular synths and stuff, and I'm like, similar thing to what you said is like, if I don't understand how all this circuitry works, then I'm just not going to use it. But it's good that, that it's something that many people might not know, but still make kind of incredible things with it. And it's just a matter of starting and allowing those happy accidents, I guess.
Yeah, and it's just I think so much of music is just a muscle. So the
Mm,
more you use it, it's I get a lot of people reaching out on Instagram being like, "Oh, I want to get into producing." Especially younger women who are like, "I want to start producing my own music. Like, what should I do?" And honestly, it's like just get really good at your DAW. Like that, even just being able to tell yourself, "I want to recreate something that sounds like this," and if you're able to kind of get close to it, like that's such a big achievement. So I think just practice, just doing it over and over, and slowly you just get better at it. I mean, I guess like anything else, but yeah.
yeah, for sure, for sure. And you've worked on so many different visual projects, such as fashion films, commercials, feature films, TV shows. So how did you first get into this? So I know you said you were studying this, but was it sort of a natural transition into work, or was there a different way to get into that?
I feel like the way that I approached it is different from other advice that I've heard people give. Like I've heard people say, go broad and just become this jack of all trades that a moment's notice can be called upon to do anything. And I feel like in my experience, especially being a woman, I just felt like it was very daunting, 7 years ago to be like, I want to be a film composer and I want to score big films. It was very hard with the fact that like I hadn't been anyone's assistant. I don't have any ins to the industry, like I don't have any like family friends or like people that I can call on. So I was like, well, what's one thing that I do really love and that I see an opening for? And that was working with fashion. And so when I was still in New York, before moving here and I'd left my job, I essentially decided because I had friends that worked in fashion that I was going to just start writing music for them. And, they were making short fashion films and starting to be, be part of Fashion Week and, small respects. And I was like, listen, just let me write the music for you and let me just kind of do that. And, fast forward a few years later, all of a sudden I have a reel and I have work to show for and, and people talk. So then it was kind of this great organic growth. And my first experience with film was actually a fashion documentary called The First Monday in May. So that was a very kind of natural progression into that. And from there, I think, just putting yourself out there as that and starting to call yourself a film composer or starting to call yourself a producer and stuff like that, I think just kind of snowballed. And again, it's been 7 years, so it didn't just kind of happen overnight, but it definitely feels like things now are at a really, really good point with especially TV shows and feature films and stuff.
Yeah. Oh, amazing, amazing. And it's something that we hear a bit on the podcast as well. Is like, everyone's sort of created their own opportunity in whatever way that has been, and it's often been a really different story to everyone else. And it sounds that way with you, approaching friends that were working in fashion and then kind of creating a space for you in that space, which is awesome because I think it is so important in this industry to kind of do that for yourself because no one else is going to.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So in the situation actually that you get approached for something, so say that is a fashion film project that someone would like you to work on, how do you usually go about that? How do you start? Do you get given like a brief or a feel or something and then you kind of work off that? Or what's the process?
I feel like that's how the process used to be. And, I would get essentially a brief or ask them for some sort of mood board, whether it was like a Pinterest board but I feel like haven't worked with fashion quite as much just because one of the things that actually made me transition away from it was that there's not much value put in music and it was always kind of a very last minute thing. And, unless you are a big band that's getting a license for Prada or Gucci, which, is a whole different can of worms. And most of the time at this point, they choose celebrities that they can also feature in their campaigns. And it's a whole other thing. It just it wasn't really a viable way of making a living. So doing the film stuff, after a few years, I was able to get a film agent. So most of the time, they're the ones that are kind of communicating with people. And especially if anyone reaches out to me, I usually put them in touch with them, or then they bring in work as well, even though, I can't stress this enough because everyone thinks that getting an agent means that you're never going to have to look for work again. But like most of the work that comes in for me, and I think for most composers, is still generated by me, making contact and networking and meeting new people. And so it really depends. On a film project, sometimes the first thing will be scripts. So you'll be able to read a script. If it's a TV series, maybe they have a pilot that they've shot that you can watch. Sometimes they haven't even shot anything. So it's like there's just like a kind of like a script Bible, there's just kind of like a description of what it's going to be. So it varies a lot. Whereas for smaller projects and ads, it's usually a brief. And then you kind of work off of that. And sometimes there's visual, sometimes there's not. So really the answer is it varies so much. And personally, there's not really a way that I prefer. Like sometimes it's great to be approached and they're like, we have this cut, we have this film, we have this thing, and it's locked and never changing again, and you go at it. Other times it's like, oh, we're just starting out and we want you into the process when we're filming. So, everything's going to shift as you write. So then you have to be super flexible. And that's really nice too sometimes. So the answer is it's always different.
Yeah.
But, one never stops kind of putting their heads out there and just, I think that if one just lived in a cave and expected to get hired, it's a little unrealistic.
Yeah, for sure. And yeah, we've heard that also, the importance of networking, and it's good to kind of reiterate that, because I think a lot of people feel like if you have a certain level of skill, people are just going to come to you and just find you. But that really doesn't happen, does it?
Yeah. And I mean, I feel like social media has made it easier to not necessarily stand out, but to have direct communication with people. And, it's a blessing and a curse, because that means that somebody will DM me and then I might read it and then forget about it. And then I've had people kind of follow up upset. And it's like, I'm so sorry. Like, can you email me? So that's usually my answer to people, like, please email me and I'll get back to you ASAP. But, that level of interaction is really great. So I think that social media is a really great tool for communication, especially now that everyone's had to be at home for the last year. So.
Yeah, for sure. I think, for me, MPW wouldn't exist at all if it wasn't for social media, I think. But it can be a blessing and a curse, I think, sometimes.
Yeah, I feel like everyone that is active on social media feels the same about that.
True.
This episode is brought to you by DistroKid. Did you know that using DistroKid's promo card feature, you can create easy customizable graphics to promote your Spotify release? You can upload a personalized design to appear with your music that you've released through DistroKid on Spotify. This is also a great way to promote your release and drive increased shares, streams, and saves of your music. This is a free feature for all DistroKid members. Take advantage of this awesome function and so many more by using our DistroKid discount link, distrokid.com/VIP/MPW.
Actually, you mentioned that fashion film wasn't really your favorite. So what is your favorite sort of visual project to work on?
Well, I feel like at the time when I was doing the fashion films, it was, I loved it and it was really great. At the moment, I've been enjoying doing TV shows a lot, like narrative TV. And I'm currently on 2 feature films as well that are both horror. And that's been super fun because you finally get, my whole career, people have always been like, oh, that sounds a little too dark. So like, it's always been a matter of making things like brighter and happier. Whereas this is the first time that I'm like, oh my God, I actually get to go in and nobody can tell me that because I can make like the darkest sounds. And so I don't know. I think just working in a narrative space, a longer form narrative space has really been great.
Yeah, right. Cool. And actually, do you, in your course and stuff, do they teach you how to make things really dark and like give you tips for that and how to approach different types of film? Or is that something you learn more on the job?
You mean in school when I was in college?
Yeah.
I mean, I feel like they try to kind of prep you for that, or they try. There's definitely like tricks and ways of like making people feel certain ways. Like a major chord will be happy and a minor chord will be sad. But I think that was kind of the extent of it. Or there was, I think there might have been an assignment where we were supposed to do like 5 moods with different orchestration. And it's like, using a clarinet can be hopeful and using violin can be sad. And, so I remember doing something like that. But I think so much of it is just sensibility and just kind of trusting your gut. And then in terms of actually being able to execute it, I think that just comes with practice and just kind of doing the job, as you said.
And when you're creating, do you have a sort of preference between synthetic sounds and natural sounds, and how do you approach sort of the mix between the two?
I think it depends on whether I'm doing something for myself or for film. For my own music, I think I get to use a lot more natural sound and a lot more field recordings, and I use my voice more, I feel like, on my own music. And, because in a way I'm fulfilling my own creative vision. Whereas with film, a lot of the things that I get hired for are kind of a hybrid mix of maybe some chamber instruments and electronics, but definitely heavy on the electronics. So I think I get to play less with organic sounds on film stuff. And also most of the time there just isn't the time to record stuff. If it's episodic TV, something like Good Girls, for example, like it started airing. They aired episode 2 on NBC last night. And, we're not even halfway through the season of scoring it. So the heat is on. So it's like they're filming it while it's already on TV and the schedule is set and you just have to get it done. You go through an episode on a Monday, and by Thursday or Friday, you need to have the music in, or usually by Thursday, then Friday you need to do revisions, and then Monday they're mixing it. So it's a very fast turnaround. So I think that sometimes you just don't have the time to kind of sit and really play with a lot of sounds that aren't kind of more in the box but with my own music, I definitely use a lot of more kind of like a mix of synthetic and natural sound for sure.
Cool. So in the situation where you don't get to record much, would you recommend getting like a sound library or kind of access to lots of different recordings?
I think it's more just having samples that you know inside and out. And I know a lot of people love buying sample libraries, and I mean I do too, but I feel like I try to really learn the ones that I have, or at least be aware of the sounds that they have, because there's nothing more daunting than sitting in front of your empty DAW and you're like, I have tens of thousands of potential sounds that I can pull in. So I think you just have to be very specific. And what's really helpful at the beginning of every project is building a template for the sounds of the show or of the project. So it's like once you commit to a certain set of sounds that work together, it's then easy to go back in and be like, oh, this motif or that motif or whatever was played on this or that instrument. So I feel like that's also helpful. But yeah, I try to stay away from, I honestly even stay away from like splice and sounds, because I'd rather make newer sounds just to not sound like everything else, and also just to, I don't know, that it's a slippery slope when you start to do too much of that. Yeah.
Fair enough. Yeah. And I guess everyone has a different approach, and
of course, yeah.
That's really cool. And there's a lot of power, I think, in knowing your tools really well, rather than kind of bombarding yourself with too many things, because then you have to learn how to use the different things, and whether it's plugins or samples or whatever it is. So yes, that's a good thing for kind of people to consider. And when you're field recording, like if it's for your own music, what gear do you use to do that?
Honestly, I still have an old Zoom H4n recorder that I've had since grad school. And it still hasn't been the bullet. And, it's one of those things where it's like I've seen new models come out, and I've seen all these new, there's even like ambisonic recording and 3D immersive audio recording devices now. But this one works well, and it's survived so many falls and so many trips. and the quality of it works well for what I do with it. I usually manipulate the sound anyway, so it doesn't have to be like the crispest of sound. I think that if I was working as obviously like a Foley artist or something that was reliant on better quality, I would maybe upgrade. But I still use my trusted friend, and I have the little furry thing that goes over it, which is such an essential part of, especially because so much of what I record is outside. So But yeah, just that. And honestly, sometimes I just use my iPhone because sometimes you're in a pinch and you're out and about and you're like, I just need to record something now. So that'll sometimes be my recorder of choice too.
Wow. Oh, cool. Good to know. And when are those situations when you're like, I need to record this sound? Is it like a street sound, or is it what would
Yeah.
inspire that?
Trying to think, it'll be something like I'll be walking to pick up food and there'll be, I don't know, there'll be some sound happening. There'll be like the clicking of something, or maybe like something's gotten stuck, or I don't know. There's
Yeah.
just like sounds of things. And that's when it's like, oh, this sounds really cool. Let me even just jot this down as an idea, like a rhythmic idea or an idea for this or that. So, and honestly, lately watching things, like listening to things and playing with blocks and doing things with my daughter, there's a lot of really cool sounds that happen when toys fall and things fall on, glasses fall on plastic, who knows? So,
Oh, that's so cool. Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, that shows that you can, there's never a set time for creativity, and that might come
yeah.
to you when you're walking down the street, or yeah, when your daughter drops a toy. So that's
Yeah, not all is
that's
lost.
awesome. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. And with your own personal performances, I've seen that they often or can include sound installation and spatial audio elements and that kind of thing. So, what is your process in creating something like this? And is it usually the installation that comes first, or is it all inspired by the music?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I've had it happen both ways, actually. Two examples that come to mind is I performed at the LA Public Library with another amazing artist called Suzanne Chani, and I knew that it was going to be a quadraphonic show. So I knew that I had these 4 speakers, and so for that I created a piece. And the whole installation aspect of it was that I was playing something and I had programmed for iPads to have XY pads, and people could trigger sounds and essentially place the sounds within the 4 speakers space. So it was kind of
Oh,
like,
wow.
so it was a sound bath, but then if somebody wanted to pick up this iPad, they could bounce the sounds of a pizzicato cello around the space and do stuff like that. So with that specific instance, the venue came first, and I was like, okay, I'm going to do something specifically for that. Another example, actually later that month, was I was set to play Moogfest, and I was supposed to play just a normal venue, and then all of a sudden they were like, well, you do spatial audio. Do you want to play our, what was it, 8.2? Was it 8.2? It was some like not super common format of immersive space, and I was like, well, of course, yes, I'll play right before Richard Devine and right before William Basinski. Like, sure, I'll do that. But that was one of those things where it's like they asked me the week before, at the time, like my biggest gig ever, and I was like, oh my God, what am I gonna do? So at that point I kept my set list that I'd been practicing. So I like kept my set list and I just made some elements of it immersive, just because I was like, I have to utilize the space, but I don't want to change everything from scratch and not feel confident. So I think it just really depends on how comfortable you are kind of like starting from nothing when something else comes up. But I think the working for the space that you have will always kind of end up being more inspiring. So kind of like the first option I would
Mm.
gravitate more towards, I think.
Right. Wow. And yeah, it sounds like pretty like daunting opportunities that you'd suddenly have to say yes to. But I guess you want to make the most of that and get as much as you can out of it. But yeah, so much preparation, I would think.
Yeah, but if you're when you're a perfectionist, I think that in as much as you hate it because nothing will ever be perfect, but at the same time it's just like the challenge of trying to make things as like precise and good as possible is also, it's that in itself is a bit of a rush. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. No, I guess so. And what software do you use to create something like that?
To do the immersive stuff, to be honest, Ableton has some great Max for Live plugins. Like there's one called Surround Panner that's really great. I've used Max MSP in the past, but the debugging and just making sure that it works consistently in Maximus Piezo was really hard. And when I was in grad school, I had the advantage of having, PhD students around that would be like, oh yeah, let me just like triple check it for you. And, they would be like, oh, this could be better and things like that. But then since then, I just find that either doing Ableton or then Pro Tools is pretty good with being able to do immersive audio, at least playback, because you can reverse phases and you can do all sorts of manipulations. And now, there's a lot of plugins. There's another one, what's it called, that works in Logic and Pro Tools, I think. It's called Ambihead, and you can make things binaural. So, things are very different than they were. So that's the kind of stuff that I use for that. And then for my own writing, I usually use Ableton just because I find it's the easiest one for me to kind of write in. And then for film stuff, I actually use Cubase because Cubase is really great when it comes to scoring for picture. And I can't get down with Logic. I don't know what it is. I just can't wrap my head around how it looks. And I've just never used it. So there you go.
Yeah. Oh, wow. Well, there's a few things there. So yeah, cool. Awesome.
Yeah.
And if someone were to kind of enter this space and to, want to create music for audio, what would be your one sort of biggest piece of advice for them?
I've already said it a few times, but just the practice. And I think also being patient with yourself, if you're frustrated, stopping and realizing how far because it's really hard to realize how far you've come in your kind of journey of learning to do things when you're in the thick of kind of like a meltdown or a moment of like uncertainty. So I think just looking back and giving yourself credit and just, being patient. I think patience is something that I still struggle with. Just like sometimes I'm so impatient for something to sound good or for like a demo of a track to be ready to send off or, something that it's just, you just have to be very meticulous and yeah. So I think just being patient, just practicing and, if all else fails, then just get up and take a walk for 5 minutes and come back. That's always helpful.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, I think there's a lot of good advice there, and one definitely of just kind of leaving whatever it is that you're doing for a little bit just to clear your head, because I think sometimes you can, especially when you have deadlines, I guess, just kind of try and sit with it and make it work when sometimes that's doing the opposite of what you wanted to do.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, awesome. All right. Well, we've covered quite a bit, and we have a question from our audience, which we can go through now before finishing up. So there's a question from Rachel Wilson. So she asked, what is your process of translation from what you see and how you think it should sound?
Very, very good and interesting question. I think that when working on film things, it's about how I feel about it, but it's a lot more about how the director feels about it. So one of the first things is, often one will do a spotting session. So you'll sit down with the director or you'll virtually connect and you'll talk through what they had in mind, or very often there will be temp music in. So that temp music will inform kind of where their head is at or where the editor's head is at. And I think that that's always really important. Granted, temp music isn't necessarily like set in stone, and oftentimes like things completely change, but I think it's good to come from that, from knowing what they had in mind. And I think what I do personally is I try to kind of reinterpret that into how I would do it. And sometimes it works on the first try, and then it's just a matter of like doing a few revisions or like a few notes. And other times, they'll hear it and they'll be like, no, I don't like it. Like, I think we need to start from scratch. So the worst thing that can happen if somebody doesn't like it is that you have to start over. And as long as you have it in you to not be precious about your own music when you're working for someone else, I think that, you just take it as a like, okay, well, let's try this again. And, just take it as a learning experience. But yeah, I think just the kind of knowing what my sound is and being listening to the director, like or the person who's in charge, like having them tell me what they want, I think is the way to really like interpret it.
Awesome. Thank you. And yeah, one thing you mentioned there about, being or not being precious about your music. And I think that's something that I guess would come with time, because maybe at the start you might take it personally every time and feel like it's actually you being terrible at your job, which it's not about at all. It's just the person kind of having different expectations. Do you have any sort of guidance on how you deal with that? Because I feel like it could be maybe a damaging thing at the start, but something you have to get over.
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting that what you mentioned at the beginning of like being able to recognize when something isn't for you. And I've had this conversation with a few musicians who have tried to do scoring. And I think when you're writing music for yourself, it's very different because you're essentially doing what works for you and what you like. And it's it's a very different muscle, and it's a very different kind of process to be able to take this rejection and of something that you've written and not, as you said, take it personally. So I mean, I think it comes down a lot to personalities and just having a personality where you're kind of like, you might think it's the greatest piece of music, but being able to tell yourself like, yes, but I got hired to elevate someone else's vision. And I think that just being able to do that is really, really important. And again, I think it's a skill that can be learned, but I also just think that if somebody doesn't have the openness to do that, and I think it's just maybe an ego thing, for good or for bad. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess so. Cool. All right. Well, thank you so much for your time. And it's been, really fascinating to see how you go through your process and and your background on how you got here. What else is on for the rest of your day?
Rest of the day, so working a little bit more on one of the horror films, just because we have a preview coming up, and then just probably looking at an episode of Good Girls, and then maybe sneaking in a little bit of working on my upcoming record. And then I need to get some music out to a violist and a cellist to play a remote session on, which I've been putting off all weekend. So yes,
All right.
that's the rest of my day.
That's quite a bit, actually.
Yeah, it's like I feel like I have this endless to-do list. Like every time I feel like I cross 3 things off, like all of a sudden there's 2 more things on there, and I'm like, oh, my God, am I ever gonna get through it? But one day at a time.
I guess it's a good thing. It's a good thing.
Yeah. I mean, I absolutely cannot complain. I'm extremely grateful for all the work and creative projects I've been able to be on. So especially right now. So, and I'm super grateful for your great questions. It's so nice to chat with somebody when the questions are really great. So thank you.
Oh, a pleasure. It's been, lovely having you on here. So I'll let you get back to the rest of your day and all the projects that you're working on. And we'll take care.
Yeah, you too. Thank you.
Thanks.